Boldwood presents My Best Friend's Secret, written by Danielle Ramsay and read by Emma Powell. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Thursday. I glanced at Willow, Izzy and Ava as they focused on the minister's reading of Psalm 23. It was unspoken, but each of us could feel this insidious rift between us. Guilt. We were all plagued by the same question. How could we not know? One of us must have been able to prevent it. Worse still, which one of us was to blame? The hornet's nest in the pit of my stomach stirred. I held my breath, hoping the waspish noise would abate. Instead, the frenzied swarm buzzed in all directions. As if reading my mind, my husband Jacob took hold of my hand and squeezed it. I caught Willow quizzically looking at me. Heat flushed up my neck. I pretended to read the order of service in honour of Jasmine Donaldson, or Jazz as she was known to us. Thankfully, Willow turned her attention back to the elderly minister. The last thing I needed today was her questioning me. I watched, unable to stop myself from feeling a stab of jealousy as Charles put his arm around her delicate shoulders and pulled her into him. I could feel the tears pricking at my eyes again. I pulled my hand from Jacob's suffocating hold. I breathed out and turned my attention to the people around me. Aside from Willow, Izzy and Ava, most were strangers, their long, mournful faces lost on me. "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever," the minister somberly concluded with a discernible quiver in his voice. He had shared in his eulogy with the mourners that he had baptized Jazz as a baby in this very church 33 years ago. And now here he was, tragically laying her to rest. I watched as he lowered his white, wispy-haired head as if in silent prayer. He then lifted his watery, light blue eyes and nodded at Jazz's father in the front row before stepping down from the imposing wooden pulpit. I dropped my head as Jazz's father stood up. I waited a few moments before looking up to see his tall, black-suited, rigid figure approach the white cloth table in front of the wooden pulpit. It was adorned with elaborate bouquets of cream roses and lilies, Jazz's favourite flowers, surrounding 2 large photographs of her. He stopped, his eyes resting on the beautiful black and white headshot of his daughter as she confident at us. It was a recent black and white photo, unlike the other one, which was an old colour photograph of Jazz taken at Queen Victoria's School for Girls as a tall, striking 11-year-old, full of life and dreams of the bright future ahead of her. He shook his head as if struggling, as I was, with the knowledge that he would never feel the warmth of Jazz's infectious smile again. Stiffly, he turned his gaze to the elaborate, solid walnut coffin positioned to the side of the pulpit. I watched as he walked towards it, his trembling, liver-spotted hand touching the polished lid before climbing his way up to the pulpit. Once there, his rheumy, hot eyes sought out mine. My skin burned with shame. It should have been me up there telling the mourners about my friend. But I had declined Jazz's father's request to read out a tribute, too fearful that I would choke on my words. Instead, I'd given it to him to read on my behalf. I'd made the excuse that my grief was so overwhelming that I doubted I would be able to speak without becoming an inconsolable mess. But in reality, it was guilt that silenced me. Not that I could tell him, nor could I tell Willow, Izzy or Ava. Jazz was the one person who knew, and she was the reason we were here. How could I stand up there and pretend that I had no part in Jazz's death? I thought back to the texts and voicemail message I had left Jazz 2 weeks ago. I replayed them over and over again in my mind, drowning out her father's voice as he read my eulogy about his daughter, my oldest friend. I watched as Willow crumpled into Charles, her body convulsing in silent sobs as Jazz's father read my words. Jacob sought my hand, gently touching it. I couldn't bring myself to look at Ava or Izzy sitting ahead of me, holding one another's hands for support. I squeezed my eyes shut as her father described his much-loved and only child to the mourners as I tormented myself with the what-if scenario. I scratched and tore at my last words to her, questioning what part they played in her death, if any. I needed to remind myself of that fact as I didn't know whether she'd listened to my voicemail. However, I knew that she'd read my WhatsApp messages by the double blue ticks. But her only response had been silence, prompting me to ring her. When she'd declined my calls, I'd left a drunken voicemail message, spiteful, unjust and accusatory. I'd made a point of reminding Jazz that I was always there for her. Or at least, I thought that was the case. Jazz chose not to talk to me that night. Instead, she took her life. When I woke up, Jazz was already gone. The reality that I could never take back those cruel last words to her tore me apart. Up until that moment, too caught up in my own maelstrom, I didn't even realise that Jazz was in trouble. Now that she had my full attention, it was too late. I was too late. I had failed her. Oh, God. Jazz, I'm so sorry. I suddenly realised that Jazz's father had stopped speaking and everyone was standing, singing. I stood up and looked down at the order of service clutched in my hand, momentarily thrown by the photograph of Jazz on the cover, smiling up at me as if nothing was wrong. Hands shaking, I fumbled through the pages searching for the hymn as the voices soared around me. Be still, my soul, when dearest friends depart, and all is darkened in the veil of tears. Be still, my soul. The order of service in my hand became blurred as tears blinded me. I slowly breathed in as I tried to focus on keeping it together, but the tears continued to trail down my face. Tears won't bring her back, Claudia. I squeezed my eyes tight as I tried to silence the guilt-fueled voice in my head. If only... I stopped myself. The singing surrounding me was drowned out by my inner voice as it raged at me about my failure to help Jazz when she needed me the most. Claudia, hey, Claudia. Jacob's concerned voice cut through my tortured thoughts. I shakily breathed out as I opened my eyes and turned to look up at him. How long had I been standing with my head bowed and eyes closed? Praying for what, Claudia? For Jazz or for yourself? Come on, we need to go, he tenderly prompted. It was then that I realised the funeral service had finished and we were the last people left in the small, centuries-old stone-built church, the rows of worn wooden pews now empty. I looked up at the front of the small kirk to the table with the lavish flowers adorning Jazz's photographs. She smiled at me, laughter in her eyes, as if mocking me for my grief. I tried but failed to swallow back the tears. I know this is hard on you. We don't need to stay for the burial. They'll understand, Jacob whispered as his dark brown, gentle eyes searched mine. I turned away from him, looking for her, for Jazz, but her coffin was gone. How did I miss them taking you? But I had, just as I'd missed the signs that my best friend was suicidal. Oh, God, Jazz. Jacob touched my face, moving a stray lock of hair that had fallen across my wet cheek. I instinctively flinched. I looked at him. He sighed. I don't think staying will help. Let's give our apologies to Jazz's parents and go, yes? I remained silent. Come on, I hate seeing you like this. Claudia, we wondered where you were, a voice interrupted. I turned to see Izzy standing in the church doorway. We think it's right that the four of us are together for... She faltered, unable to say the unthinkable, shaking her head instead. For the truth was, we were about to bury our old school friend. Nothing could make that fact bearable. I'm coming, I somehow managed to answer. Izzy looked at me, then at Jacob, the strain between the three of us palpable. Embarrassed, she nodded, then left. As I made my way out of the pew, Jacob grabbed my arm to stop me. Don't do this, he said.